Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, we're talking about a machine that didn't just change transportation. It changed time, distance, work, dating, shopping, war, suburbs, and the shape of everyday life. What is it? The automobile.
And the history of that car is not a single eureka moment. It is a long argument among inventors, fuels, roads, tires and factories, and the public. The car becomes dominant only when the whole system around it, roads, production, fuel, and maintenance, catches up.
Now, to frame this simply here, folks, the automobile starts out as a bold experiment. Then it becomes a rich person's toy. Then becomes a mass product. And eventually, it almost becomes an assumption, like electricity, like running water. You notice it most when it's missing.
Perfect. So let's start with the oldest question. What counts as a car before cars were normal?
If we define an automobile as a self-propelled road vehicle, the concept shows up before the internal combustion engine. One landmark example is Nicholas Joseph Cugnot, who built steam-propelled tractors for hauling artillery, one in 1769 and another the following year in 1770.
So basically, the first car energy is how do we move heavy military equipment without horses?
Right. Steam could produce motion, but it brought problems: weight, complexity, and the reality that roads weren't built for heavy machinery. Early roads outside cities could be muddy trails or rutted paths. That matters because the car story is always half vehicle, half road.
And already we see the psychological side. People don't accept a machine just because it moves. They adopt it when it feels reliable, predictable, and socially usable. Steam vehicles could be impressive, but they weren't yet the kind of thing that you'd trust for daily errands. Now, I must say, I had an experience when, oh God, back in the Stone Age, um, I visited a farmer in Nebraska, actually, who had a penchant for collecting things. And one of the things he collected was cars. And so I got to ride in a Model T and I got to ride in a Stanley steamer. I actually got to drive the Model T, but they were both fascinating. And actually, I thought the Stanley steamer was pretty nice.
There's a famous photograph of airplane tycoon, movie producer, and inventor Howard Hughes in his early days driving around in a Stanley Steamer when he's only 13 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. It even if it's just a short distance, like down a driveway or down to a road or up a driveway, driving a car can be quite fun, I think. But I have to tell you this, if you tell me that my car needs to build pressure like a boiler, then I'm just going to assume that I just have to buy a new hobby as well as an amateur engineer.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, by the late 1800s and the early 1900s, you're not choosing a car versus no car. You're choosing among types, steam, electric, and gasoline.
Exactly. The early car era is a technology competition, sort of like Betamax and VHS for VCRs. Electric cars were appealing because they were quiet and relatively easy to operate. In the United States, in 1900, electric cars had a substantial share of the market. National Geographic notes as much as 38%.
Wow, that's pretty impressive,
Yes, it
especially for
is, and
that
it always
time.
seems to surprise people. The electric car isn't new at all. It's almost like we're returning to an older fork in the road.
But those early electrics had constraints, very limited range, and scarce recharging infrastructure. Steam could be fast, but had practical drawbacks for everyday use. Over time, gasoline cars gained an edge because they could travel farther between refueling and were easier to use for longer trips. The Smithsonian notes by 1905, gasoline cars were more popular than steam or electric, and by 1910, gasoline cars grew much larger and more powerful.
So adoption wasn't purely about best engineering. It was about what fit normal life, the speed of refueling, distance, convenience, and the ability to travel beyond the city.
Which makes the automobile feel less like a single invention and more like a negotiation. The vehicle and society agree on what practical means.
When people ask who invented the automobile, they often mean who built the first practical internal combustion automobile that became the template for modern cars. Carl Benz is central here. Mercedes-Benz describes January 29, 1886. Benz's patent application for a vehicle powered by a gas engine as the birth certificate of the automobile and notes the very first public outing reported in July 1886.
And Britannica similarly frames Benz as designing and building the first practical internal combustion automobile in 1885.
So, what changes in that moment? Is it the engine itself or the idea that this isn't just some one off machine?
It's both. The internal combustion engine becomes a compact, repeatable power source. But repeatable is the key word. Cars don't reshape society until they can be produced, fueled, repaired, and driven on usable roads.
And until people believe they can depend on them, a practical car isn't just one that moves, it's one that people can picture using without constant uncertainty. So let's talk about that environment. Cars don't run on ideas, they ride on roads.
In the United States, the push for better roads grows into a broad political and civic effort. Britannica describes the Good Roads movement as a crusade that began in the late 1800s and lasted until the National Highway System was created in 1926. The crusade was initiated by bicyclists and expanded as automobiles became common.
So, bicycles helped kick off the movement, and then came cars because they're heavier and more numerous. And this kind of turned it into a national demand.
Exactly. The Smithsonian notes that rural roads in the 19th century were often muddy trails, and that road building really took off in the 20th century as a response to rising numbers of cars and trucks, with federal law and funding fueling road building after 1960.
This is one of those systems moments. Better roads encourage more cars. More cars create political pressure for better roads. And then the design of cars changes because the surface they drive on changes.
And paved roads also change the expectations. If I'm mostly bouncing over ruts, then I want rugged clearance and durability. If I'm on smoother pavement, then suddenly I care about speed, comfort, noise, and handling.
Yeah, that's a really important point there, Chandler. Um,
I think so too.
yeah. This is a perfect bridge into tires because tires are literally where the car meets the road.
Early automobile tires weren't automatically pneumatic. Solid rubber tires existed as an option. Henry Ford Museum, a place I've been to and enjoyed many times, notes that in the automobile's earliest years, solid rubber tires offered an alternative to pneumatic tires. They were long lasting and resistant to cuts and blowouts, but they were heavy and produced an uncomfortable ride. Air filled tires proved more popular for automotive use.
Now that is intuitive. Solid rubber is like nothing can pop this, but it's also like you will feel every pebble in your spine.
And Britannica makes the same basic physics explicit. With solid tires, the rubber carries the load and absorbs the shocks. With pneumatic tires, the compressed air carries much of the load and absorbs shocks. One reason pneumatic tires became dominant for most free moving vehicles.
Which is more than comfort. It's fatigue. It's control. It's how safe it feels at speed. It acts like a suspension element at the wheel, smoothing vibrations before they get to the vehicle body and before they get to the driver's attention and anxiety.
So, better tires aren't just nicer, they make higher speeds and longer trips psychologically tolerable.
Quite true. The pneumatic tire story also has its own inventors. John Boyd Dunlop developed the practical pneumatic tire in 1888, but adapting the idea to automobiles required further innovation. Michelin's own heritage materials highlight the early period where the company mounted tires on a vehicle called Leclerc for the Paris Bordeaux Paris race. And the Automotive Hall of Fame notes that this era helped launch the market for detachable pneumatic automobile tires.
Yeah, you just said a whole mouthful there, Dr. Deneen.
Yes, he did.
It's really important too. Uh, when you said detachable pneumatic automobile tires, we don't even think about it anymore. If you get a flat tire, what do? Dr. Deneen, you take the flat tire off, right? The wheel and all of it off, and you put on a tire that's already mounted on a wheel, which attaches to the car, right?
Indeed.
Well, that wasn't always that way. You used to have to take the tire, the wheel didn't come off. You had to take the tire off of the wheel.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, it was very different. So, anyhow, once paved roads spread, the value of pneumatic tire compounds became important. Smooth pavement makes higher speeds practical. Higher speeds make cushioning and traction more important. And then tires evolve tread patterns, construction, and durability to match those new demands.
So, the tire shift is basically that solid rubber survives the rough early era, but pneumatic tires unlock the civilian, everyday car experience. Less punishing, more controllable, and more scalable.
Now we get to a turning point in the who gets a car story. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he radically changed production. History.com notes that on December 1st, 1913, Ford installed the first moving assembly line for the mass production of an entire automobile, reducing build time from more than 12 hours to 1 hour and 33 minutes. But
Whoa,
Whoa,
that's
from
crazy.
more than 12 hours to only 1 hour and 33 minutes? Whoa!
by 1924, they were doing it in 35 minutes.
Well,
Lord.
that number is always the gut punch because it means that the car isn't handcrafted transportation anymore. No, no. It's industrial output.
And Ford's own corporate history notes the moving assembly line at the Highland Park plant was first operated in October 1913, and the Model T production jumped from hundreds a day to thousands per day, with prices falling dramatically over time in the development of the so-called $5 a day minimum wage in 1914, about $60 in today's money.
Yes, this is where the automobile stops being merely a technology and becomes a social force. Mass production doesn't just increase supply, it changes culture. It creates a new expectation, mobility as something ordinary people can plan their lives around.
And it changes what design means. Once you're making thousands of vehicles, then you design for manufacturing standardized parts, repeatable assembly maintenance networks, and a car that can survive the roads that actually exist, not the roads that we wish existed.
Why did designs change once more paved roads existed? Do you have an answer for that, Dr. Deneen?
I do. First, speed becomes a normal expectation. Better roads allow more consistent and faster travel. That changes engineering priorities. Stability, steering precision, braking performance, and the ability to handle sustained motion without punishing vibration.
Also, the early horseless carriage look starts to feel outdated. If your road is smoother and your car is faster, then you want windshields, more weather protection, and a body shape that is less like a buggy and more like a purpose filled vehicle.
Second, tires and suspension become central to design. Botanica's discussion of automobile tires emphasizes that the pneumatic tires provide traction for acceleration and braking and limit the transmission of road vibrations to the body. That matters more as speeds rise and people demand comfort for their daily commutes and for longer travel.
You know, uh, Chandler, when you just mentioned you want windshields, more weather protection. Don't know if you know this, but back in that time, there were often no side windows on cars. They
Yes, I
had
did know that.
they had little pull down plastic things, okay, that you could put down, but you couldn't see through them. So that made it very impractical. So people didn't often use them, and people would often get very cold and and ill with that stuff. So anyhow, third, there's a human factor. Paved roads reduce one kind of unpredictability. When that's like mud, deep ruts, sudden sinkholes. Once that unpredictability declines, people become less tolerant of the discomfort that remains. The baseline for acceptable ride shifts upwards.
So, in other words, once the road stops beating you up, then you notice that the car is beating you up. It's like you can't win for losing.
There's also a feedback loop. More cars motivate more road construction. The Smithsonian explicitly ties the 20th century road building boom to rising numbers of cars and trucks and notes federal support for roads after 1916. So the landscape changes and automakers design for that new landscape. Lower centers of gravity, improved brakes, better lighting, more reliable engines, and tires designed for traction and durability on pavement.
Which means the car's evolution isn't just inventors making clever improvements. No, it's a relationship between surfaces, speeds, and human expectations.
When people talk about the automobile, they picture a vehicle, but the vehicle is only one piece of it. The car needs fueling, repair, a driver culture, and most importantly, one of the important things, you have to have a road to drive on. And once all those exist, then the automobile becomes a normal tool of life.
Historically, you can see the system solidify. Early experiments, as I said before, in competing power sources, a practical internal combustion breakthrough associated with Carl Benz in the mid 1880s, and then the rapid growth of gasoline dominance by the early 1900s. And road movements and government investment, mass production via Ford's moving assembly line beginning in 1930.
And the tire story is a perfect microcosm of that system. Solid rubber tires could survive harsh conditions and avoid blowouts. Yes, that's true. But they weren't comfortable. Pneumatic tires used air as a shock absorber and became better suited to the experience people wanted and to the paved road world that was emerging.
Which is why car history is never just car history. It's a lot more than that. It's road history, it's factory history, it's materials history, and honestly, it's expectation history. What people come to demand as normal.
So next time you're driving on a smooth, paved road, it's worth remembering that surface helped shape the vehicle you're in, and the vehicle helped shape the surface under you.
The automobile didn't just simply appear and then society adapted. Society and the machine co evolved. Roads, tires, engines, factories, and daily life pulling each other forward.
And the surprise, well, at least for me, is how many modern debates are really old debates, like electric versus gasoline, infrastructure versus vehicle tech, comfort versus durability, local travel versus long distance freedom.
Yes. Well, listen, we could go on. There's more that we could say, etc. But I want to thank you for listening to Things You Don't Know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please come back for some more. Leave a comment with the earliest car story in your family. I'd love to hear about it. The first road trip, maybe the first breakdown, the first time someone learned to drive. Oh Lord, I remember teaching, my children to drive. Yes, sir. And that was very interesting. And if you're watching, or listening here, give us a like, subscribe, and share. But for now, for Dr. Deneen and Chandler Foster, we're going to stop this recording and say, come on back. Goodbye for now, folks.